Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Agatha Caraballo, and thank you for joining the FIU Department of Public Policy and Administration's Leadership Lecture Series held in collaboration with the Broad Lecture Series and with our many community partners and collaborators, including the Local Government Hispanic Network, which was the contact for our upcoming speaker, Mr. Carlos Baía. I'm just going to briefly just provide his bio, and which was also provided in the registration link. Mr. Baía is the Deputy City Manager for Development for the City of Concord, New Hampshire. In that capacity, Carlos oversees the engineering, planning, economic development, code administration, and health licensing operations for the capital city, as well as the airport. Prior to Concord, Carlos was the Economic Development Manager for the City of Deerfield Beach, Florida, where he also ran the Beach Cove Community Redevelopment Agency. Carlos is a graduate of Brandeis University and holds master's degrees from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the University of Florida. He is an ICMA Credentialed Manager and Certified Economic Development Finance Professional. Carlos's professional activities include the past presidency of the Municipal Management Association of New Hampshire and service on the International City County Management Association, I apologize, I got kicked off there for a minute. But without further ado, I will share Mr. Baía's bio in the chat link. But I want to, again, thank you, Mr. Baía, for joining us, and please feel free to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Professor Caraballo. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm speaking to you from my office here in Concord, New Hampshire. I'm looking forward to talking to you today about what I'm going to call my sort of local government story. And if I could share my screen, I've got a slide deck that I would like to show here. Can everyone see that? Hopefully you can see that. Can just a nod. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about sort of my story, my local government story. I'm hoping that there'll be takeaways for everyone in the audience. I'm also going to try and address some of the great questions that Professor Caraballo forwarded to me from the group. And if I don't get to all of the questions, I think at the end I'll still leave time to try and address those. So the question becomes sort of why I got into local government management and why I think this would be a profession that more people, including hopefully some of you, should pursue. So to me, growing up, I always wanted to strengthen my community. It felt very important to me to make sure that the social fabric of the community, the civic culture of the community was something that was strong, because usually when that's strong, you have lower indices of crime, you have better health, etc. So that was always something that drove me. So the notion that I could actually have a career and get paid to do that, to me, was very, very attractive. I was also sort of drawn to the notion of local government because of its complexity. And this is something I think I knew intuitively when I was early on in my career, but I think it was later on as I got further into it that I realized what it really meant. So if you compare a local government to a typical business, for example, a business may have one or two sort of product lines or business lines, but in local government, be it county or city or town government, you may have 12, 15, 20 different business lines if you think about it, because you'll have a police department, a fire department, you'll have sanitation, wastewater treatment, water treatment, parks and rec, planning, engineering, and it just keeps going and going and going. So each of those different departments, they have unique features that make them easily a standalone entity. So when you're in the management of a community, you really have to be somewhat of an expert in all of those so you can speak coherently to the community members, the residents, and as well as to your city commissions or your county commissions or anyone else for that matter. So that to me makes it so that every day there's something different that could possibly happen, which sometimes can be stressful, but most of the time it just makes the days seem more fulfilling. And of course, you've probably heard that of the three levels of government, federal, state, and local government is where you can make the most impact. And you can test that just right now. If you're at home, just turn on your faucet. If the water comes out, that's local government. If you flush the toilet, if you leave trash at the curb, if you call for an ambulance. In most communities, again, that tends to be local government that provides those services. So there's a very sort of intimate connection between local government and residents. And finally, what I also found very appealing was the council manager form of government. So I grew up in Massachusetts in a community of about 100,000, a city, and that city was a strong mayor form of government, which most cities in Massachusetts tend to be strong mayor. I wasn't particularly interested in that form of government. And so when I came to Florida, and actually went to the University of Florida for graduate school, I started to learn more about council manager and learned its history, that it was a reaction to sort of the patronage spoils politics of sort of Tammany Hall in New York City in the late 19th, early 20th century. And it was a form of government that really stressed professionalism, merit, sort of clean, ethical government. And that was something that I was very much interested in. So that kind of led me to pursue this as a career. So getting into this profession, some of the questions actually were sort of in line with that. So how do you get a foothold in this profession? So I've got great news for all of you. First of all, this is a great time to get into local government because there's something going on. You've probably heard this term before. It's called a silver tsunami. Silver tsunami basically means that there is a cohort of people in our profession in local government management right now across the country that are in that baby boomer generation. And that cohort is retiring en masse. So for probably the last 5 years, probably the next 10 years, you're going to see a lot of openings in terms of city managers, county managers, some of the assistants as well. And of course, if the assistants move up, there'll be backfilled positions that need to be backfilled also. So there's a lot of opportunities, more opportunities candidly than when I started in this profession in the 90s. So, good for you guys. And in cities right now, because we have all these openings, we're trying to get, the really engaged, articulate candidates. And I know that some of you, not all of you, I'm sure some of you have, careers that you're in right now, but if you're just in graduate school, very limited experience, some pieces of advice that I can give you would be, first of all, capitalize on what you have. So if you have a master's thesis or a capstone project you're doing, try to find something that can be applied to the career that you're looking to go into. So if you're looking to go in local government, is there a theme or a topic that you can do a paper on or your capstone on that you can use? Also, fellowships, internships. When I was in my 20s, I was sort of the internship king. I did every internship possible. I probably had a half dozen because I was just trying to get a broad swath of experience. And so I'll just give you a little analogy from when I started. So I had actually had an internship at the Alachua County Office of Management and Budget. And as part of the internship, I was given the task of figuring out they had just had a legislative change regarding some of their taxation practices. And the community was trying to figure that out, what it meant in terms of fiscal impact. So here I am, the lowly intern. They gave me this project. So I did what any graduate student will do, right? I tried to gather as much data as possible, figured out all the demographic information, found what the taxation rates were, and basically extrapolated that information to come up with a conclusion or an educated guess, if you will. I gave that to my supervisors, and next thing I know, that was being translated to the county commission to become policy. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. And then I went to apply for my first job, and I'm actually in the interview across the desk from the city manager. And the city manager sees on my resume that I'd done this work for this particular issue, and he's actually taking meticulous notes. And I realized after the fact that he's taking notes because that particular community also didn't have a solution to this problem. So he was basically cribbing off my work during my interview. So, and that turned out fine. So these are the kind of things that gave me an advantage because it made me as a candidate memorable, also proved to the person that was hiring me that I had the skills to actually get work done as soon as I got onto the job. Another tool that I hope all of you avail yourselves of is student chapters. So ICMA is the trade profession for city and county managers, the trade association, I should say. So we have student chapters throughout the country. I hope there's one at FIU. I don't know if there is. There is. Okay, I see nodding heads. That's great. That's a nice tool as well because it provides you an entry point into the national conference, and you get to meet other managers, and you can participate because you become members of ICMA automatically, but you also become members of the local government Hispanic network. So hopefully you've done that also. So that's another tool that's out there. And then finally on this issue, one thing the most important tip I can give you is if you are applying to local government, please, please, please research the community. I will tell you that having done this now for over 20 years, I've interviewed dozens of candidates for jobs. And I am always dismayed at how few of them actually know anything about the community at all. So please do research, find out what are the pressing issues in the community that you're applying to. What are its assets? What are its elected officials? What are their agendas? How long has the manager been there? These are critical pieces of information that will allow you to speak coherently during your interview and have it become more of a dialogue versus just sort of this unidirectional, information stream. So if you do that, I can tell you that you will definitely make a favorable impression on whoever is interviewing you. So fast forward, I applied for my first job back in the 90s, my first real city job. And the job was called a Business Alliance Coordinator. Now I challenge you to define what that means, because I didn't know what it meant. Even today, it really is kind of a nebulous job. It was a grant funded position. And it basically came down to one sentence, the job description, which is basically there was a lending pool to assist local businesses to put up hurricane shutters to protect their businesses, because statistically, a local or a small business, I should say, if it's out of commission for a period of, I believe, 4 days or more, it's something to the effect of like 95% of those businesses will fail. And so FEMA had a program working with local governments to basically incentivize businesses to put up, again, hurricane shutters and protection. So I could have done just that, and I would have satisfied the requirements of the job description. But if you really want to make an impression and grow in this career, you're going to do more, right? Because I know all of you are probably ambitious and you're articulate and you want to succeed. So what I ended up doing is I took that same job description. I figured out, well, I need to work with banks. How do I get to the banks? Well, I joined the Chamber of Commerce. Next thing I know, I'm going to monthly Chamber of Commerce meetings. I'm also now participating on Chamber of Commerce committees and projects. While I'm doing that, now I'm meeting businesses in the community, because as soon as they find out I worked for local government, they came up to me and said, listen, I've got this issue with a permit, or I'm looking to expand my business and I'm trying to find another location. Can you help me with that? So now I end up doing economic development, which I've not been trained on, but economic development, a lot of it tends to do with putting people together and fixing problems. And so I was trying to do that also. Then I realized that Deerfield Beach, at the time at least, had the largest Brazilian immigrant population in all of Florida. And it was great because I'm Portuguese, I speak Portuguese, so I thought I can finally apply, all those years of Portuguese school my parents made me do. So I got to apply those skills, and I tried. It was very important to me to make sure that that community had a voice, because they were really sort of alienated, not by anything the government did, but they were just sort of on their own. And I wanted to make sure that they had a seat at the table. So I started to work with them. Then this job, the Business Alliance Coordinator, was organizationally and physically located within the fire department. So my office was literally in the main fire station. I was right above all the fire apparatus. So every day I'm interacting with firefighters and paramedics. They're taking me under their wing. They're putting me into training to do emergency management. I'm going on fire calls. I'm doing all kinds of things that I never in my life would have thought that I would do, but that's broadening my skills. So when I left this job, actually, I was now certified to work at an emergency operations center. So that's a skill set, again, that I would never have anticipated. And then also, as we're doing this program for this Business Alliance Coordinator position, we're trying to get the word out to the community. And so this particular city, Deerfield Beach, what they had done is they actually had a booth set up by the beach. And of course, to give out brochures. Of course, if you all have been to the beach, I'm sure you have, being in South Florida, the last thing you want to do when you go to the beach is pick up somebody's informational brochure. So they weren't having much success with that. So we changed all that. We tweaked it, and we created it into a special event where we actually brought in, we had the same information, but we brought in vendors, food vendors, we brought in bands, we brought in a firefighter competition, made it into something we ended up calling the Beach Blowout, which became a multi-day event every year. So now I'm doing special events management. Again, it's just, you try and build on your skills and build on your networks. So did all that. And then in the span of about 11 months, I was offered the opportunity by the city manager of Deerfield Beach to become the city's first economic development manager and director of its redevelopment agency. So now here I have an opportunity to apply new skills or renewed skills, because I used to teach at the University of Florida. So now I'm teaching in essence because I'm advocating for redevelopment projects to the community. So I'm going out to neighborhood associations, to church groups, sports leagues, whatever it might be, whoever would invite me, I would go and I would talk about all the great things that we're trying to do, particularly in our beach area. We're trying to redevelop that whole part of our city. So I'm advocating. Secondly, now I'm managing projects. So I'm managing multi-million-dollar construction projects. So I'm working with engineers, working with contractors, state agencies, et cetera, trying to make sure that everything stays on time and on budget. So that's, again, another skill set that was developing. And of course, local governments are notorious for not having unlimited resources. So I had to be creative. How do I get the word out? And this was before social media. So I have to figure out, and this is like ancient times, right? So it's, creating a newsletter. We ended up actually translating a lot of our publications to Portuguese and Spanish because those were the two languages that I spoke. So I ended up doing that myself. And that was pretty cool, again, because I always wanted to, I'm fascinated by language. So I wanted to do some things like that. And every time I meet a new group, every time I take on a new task, again, my networks are expanding and I'm sort of overlapping. They're like concentric circles, if you will. So that gets you, again, to the questions that came from some of the members. How do you get a foot in the door? These are the things you do to get that foot in the door, to apply yourself to the next promotion or to the next job somewhere else. One thing that I do want to point out is with this particular job as economic development manager, as I mentioned earlier, I hadn't been trained formally in that. So I did realize about a year in that some of my colleagues in this profession, they had certifications, for example, that I didn't have. And so what I did is I asked my city manager, would he be supportive of me doing training to be certified? And that would have been a 2 to 3 year process and cost several $1,000s. And the manager was absolutely supportive because, and I say this as a tip for all of you, wherever you are, if you work in a local government, I can tell you that most supervisors, if they're worth their salt, will want you to be the best trained employee possible. So if you feel like you're lacking in any one area, don't feel inhibited and go ahead and ask for some training because usually they want to support you and you may be surprised at what they can do for you. So the manager supported me and that was very helpful to me going forward. So in Deerfield, we had a lot of success. It was a great 8 years I spent there. So this is just some clips from things we had done. So the article on the right, just to point out the picture at the very top right in that article, you see a flooded street. That's the way our Ocean Way, which is the road that's right on our beach, used to look. It had no drainage. So we cleared that all up. The next picture beneath it is basically that same roadway. We took care of all the drainage. We also took the opportunity to make it much more attractive. So we put in paver walkway, palm trees, etc. It was a beautiful project. I'm very happy and proud of what we did there in that particular instance. And we did other projects as well. And then the articles on the left are just showing some of the things we tried to do with the Brazilian community while I was there. Of course, there's successes, but then there's also a little bit of controversy. If you are making change, I will tell you that it's never without controversy. People across the board have an aversion to change. Some have more of an aversion than others. So redevelopment by its nature implies change. So I point out here on this slide, there's a website, cut out a piece of a website from the original Save Our Beach group. This was a special interest group in Deerfield Beach. They were sort of the nemesis of local government while I was there. They were very active, and you can tell just by the language here, they were not supportive of our redevelopment efforts. You can say here, it says here, excuse me, proposed restaurant for the pier area. They are not kidding. It's going to be increased traffic, you know. And it became a long slog to get a lot of our projects done because this is a political job in the sense of there's transparency and it's based on merit, but the folks you work for, the manager and especially the city commissions, they are elected officials. So there is a level of politics in every community. And so you have to be cognizant of that and you have to maneuver through that. And so, you know, be patient. One thing, it's important to remain civil. I can tell you, I was cross-examined publicly for over an hour at a public meeting once by the attorney for this group. It was not pleasant by any stretch of the imagination, but you have to remain calm because you have to realize, you know, you are the representative of the organization. So you have to come off as very professional and calm. and make sure that you don't lose your integrity. Integrity is the one thing that you'll have forever. So you have to, don't jeopardize that at all. And finally, take the long view. This is something as when it was in my 20s and 30s, I didn't appreciate. Now I do, is if you want to accomplish something that the community may not be ready for on whatever the occasion is, come back to it, give it some time. You may be as frustrated as I was the first time, but communities change, elected officials change, dynamics change, economic factors change, which might make whatever you were proposing more amenable a year or two later. And I've come to find that that is in fact what will happen. It's happened to me in Deerfield Beach. It happens to me here in Concord. So again, you just have to be patient. Of course, despite its successes, Deerfield Beach was not without its challenges. One of the things that candidly happened is that because we were criticized pretty much incessantly by the original Save Our Beach group, there developed this perception, sort of this mentality of it's us versus them. So nothing that the community did, or the organization did, was met with any positive reaction by that group, and they were very vocal. And so, unfortunately, when that happens, it tends to lend itself to sort of a tunnel vision approach where you don't see the big picture, and it's sort of a battle. And it's very reminiscent of what you see in national government today, unfortunately. So that was not great. And then another problem that developed was that we had an election change, and one of our city commissioners basically entered into a feud with the city manager at the time, to the point that there were allegations that the commissioner and the manager each somehow were hiring their own private investigator to track each other down. There was an instance where there was a police officer placed outside the city manager's office because a particular commissioner and a manager almost came to blows with each other. So it was just a weird place to work at that time. And when that situation happens, unfortunately, when there's a rift between the city commission or the county commission and the manager, it really creates a leadership void. Because the manager can't be proactive. In our case, we had a city manager that was very progressive in terms of development issues. But he really couldn't do anything because he found himself having to fend off a lot of challenges and attacks from the city commission, which tends to, unfortunately, create a mission freeze for the organization because you don't have direction. So you lose that direction. In my case, it was a little bit worse because my board of directors for the redevelopment agency was the city commission. So I reported directly to them for redevelopment activities. And that city commission at the time actually said, don't do anything. We want you to stop working on everything you do, because they wanted to undercut the city manager because he was so pro development and redevelopment. And if you can imagine, I know some people think that's great when you're told, hey, just sit around your office and don't do anything. To me, it was the most stressful time of my career because I felt like I'm anxious. I need to do something. I want to get things done. That's my nature. So that was tough. And finally, we kind of knew, staff did, that there was some less than ethical behavior going on. We suspected it with some of our city commissioners. And in fact, a year or so after I left the organization, left Deerfield Beach, three of the members of our city commission were arrested. Of the five, there were five, and three were arrested. Two were eventually convicted. The two that are pictured here are actually city commissioners. And they were convicted and served time. So, which unfortunately didn't surprise me. But again, so that created an atmosphere that was not particularly healthy at the time. So it may be time to move on. It may be time to move on. If things are going well, it could be time to move on. If you feel like, hey, you've accomplished all your goals. If things aren't going as well, it could be that you find that you can't make progress anymore, or you're looking for new challenges, or it could be an unhealthy environment like I had at the tail end of Deerfield Beach. But the important part here is that if you are moving on now, you should be very selective of your next community, because you're no longer going to be that rookie. You're going to be somebody who brings in a lot of skills and a wealth of experience. So don't just jump at the first community that will hire you. Make sure you research the community, figure out, okay, is it stable? Does it fire city managers every year? There are some communities, particularly in South Florida, that are known for firing a city manager every year to 18 months. Those are tough places to work because, again, you can't get consistency and really lay out a strategic plan. So again, research the community, figure it out, ask people in the community, ask business leaders, go to local businesses, sort of uninvited, just show up at a retail shop and say, hey, what's it like being in this community? And before you make your commitment. So that's kind of the things I did back in 2007. And I saw a position with the city of Concord, New Hampshire. It would have been the deputy city manager for development. To me, it was a promotion, obviously, but it was also something that was very attractive because it was the state capital. So that sort of lends itself to a different dynamic because I know I would be more involved with the state legislature and doing, basically advocating for projects there. It also matched my skill set, which is something that's very important. You want to make sure that you go into a job where you can align pretty well and pretty easily, and you can still allow yourself room to grow. It was obviously closer to my family. Like as I mentioned, I'm from Massachusetts originally. This is New Hampshire, but it's 2 hours from my hometown. And as I came to discover this community and do more research on it, I figured out that it was sort of a management utopia. When I say that is because this particular community has a 15-member city council. When I first heard 15 members, I thought, oh my goodness, this is like, how are we going to get anything done? But in fact, the 15 members in Concord have a long tradition of civil discourse. So I've now been at this community for 13 years. In those 13 years, there has never been not a single public meeting where people have raised their voices, not a single public meeting where people have attacked each other, and not a single public meeting where anybody has spoken ill about anyone else. And I challenge you to find a community like that. So this is a great place. So that's why it's kind of a utopia, just because when I talk to other managers in my profession, they're like, they can't believe it. This is like, wow, that's great. Can I get a job with you? That's what they want to do. So I hit Concord. I came to Concord, like I said, in 2007. Second job, so I did that research, which I was telling you about. And I had a very clear plan in mind. In my first 60 days, my goal was to meet with every single city councilor individually, to meet with the department heads, employees that were under my purview, also individually. And I also wanted to meet with every CEO and small business owner that I could find and sort of influencer in the community, because I wanted to know what their concerns were, what their impressions were of Concord city government. And it was very important for me also not to meet at City Hall. I wanted to meet in their businesses, in their town, in their homes, I should say, because I wanted to see what their lives were like, because that's how I can get an appreciation for what their needs are. So I did all that the first 60 days, and that was great because it gave me the ability to figure out what I need to tackle. And by the way, after I interviewed each person, whoever it was, I ended each interview the same way. I said, is there someone else you think I should talk to? And that's, again, how I started to expand my networks. And then so I took those strategic ideas and I decided, okay, what's the low-hanging fruit that we can tackle right now? So this is another important piece. If you're in a new job in an organization and they want you to make change, find some of the easy things to make change right away, because that will send a message that, number one, you understand that things do need to change. And number two, you can get things done. So in Concord's case, Concord had developed a reputation over the years of being sort of, I don't want to say anti-business, but definitely not business friendly. And developers would talk about how it would take a long time to get through a process. People were not very communicative from the staff. So the city manager created this deputy city manager position precisely to be sort of the decisive authority to get things done. And because of that, because I knew that when I came here, after I met with these people, I heard was, we want to redevelop our downtown. We have a very attractive historic downtown, but there were many empty apartments and things like that because these were historic buildings that hadn't been touched in years. So how do we do that? So we heard concerns that people said, the building codes need to be adjusted and we need financial incentives to make this happen. So we did some research and we found out that in fact, there was a building code specific to historic buildings that the community could adopt, it just hadn't done it yet. There was also financial incentive that the state offered that the city could adopt, and again, hadn't done it. So that was my first priority, getting those things adopted through the city council. And in fact, that's what we did. So in the first 2 to 4 months, we adopted those two changes, and we became the first city in the entire state to do that. So now we have a PR advantage, right? Now we can say, in all the communication and media, we can say, hey, we're proactive. We're the first ones to do these things. So we're turning that reputation around. So that was very important. Now, in terms of softer skills, I did want to improve this development reputation, but I had to change a mindset, right? So I get here to Concord And I've always been the person that I feel very fervently that as a city government worker, the private sector and the city government were really partners in each other's success. That sounds really hokey. I get it. People tell me that. It's like, oh, that's you don't believe that. I absolutely do believe it. And I say that, and I told every single person that works here, I've told them that multiple times. And anybody I interview, I say the same thing. If you want to work here, you have to buy into this philosophy, because what that means is that if someone comes to you with a concern or a project or an idea, your answer as a city government employee can't just be, oh no, can't just be a blanket no. It has to be, let me hear your concern, let me hear your idea, and let's talk about it. It may not work in a particular instance in this property, it could work somewhere else, or the idea could be changed, it could be tweaked a bit, and we can make it better. So let's do that. Now that implies more work on the part of staff, but that's the only way we're successful, because if the projects are actually built, we provide jobs to the community, we provide tax base, and those are two critical elements. Whereas if you just say no, people go away and nothing happens. So that was important for me philosophically to make sure the staff understood that. And of course, we wanted to streamline our processes. So we had a rather cumbersome development review process if somebody wanted to go to the planning board and get approved for whatever project they wanted to build. So what we did is we took lean practices. You may have heard of lean, hopefully in some of your studies. So lean is just this process that came from the manufacturing sector, which basically looked there at sort of the assembly line process and figured out ways, they mapped it out, figuring out ways where they could make it more efficient. So we took our entire staff and spent a week in a conference room mapping out on the wall our entire development review process. And after that week, we realized that we could eliminate 23 different touch points in that process, which would save time, energy, and money for the communities. So that was an important change. We also reorganized, and reorganization, by the way, is not a one-time thing. You will reorganize multiple times if you stay with an organization long enough, if you believe that it's warranted, because again, personnel changes, economic factors change, so those things will happen. So be open to that. And probably the most important thing is build your team, which means that when you hire someone, you have to really spend the time to get to know that person and make sure it's the right fit for your organization and the right fit for you, because this is a person that you're going to be working with very closely, probably. So again, make sure things work. That's really critical. And that's one of the things, and one of your questions was, what lessons have I learned, I think, over the years? That's the toughest one right there. Sort of the evolution, my personal evolution was trying to connect better and making sure I had the right people and they were connected. So for example, you probably can tell, I'm very goal-oriented, very task-oriented. And I was also growing up in my profession, I was the kind of person that I would get to a meeting and I'd want to jump right into the agenda. Let's go. We got things to do. And I had to change. I had to adapt, because I realized that working with teams, working with my staff, that people, they want to feel a connection. Not everybody, but probably the majority of people want that connection. So it does take, you have to nurture those relationships. A lot more time spent in sort of small talk, getting to know what's going on in their families and things like that. And that's helped me, actually. I've grown as a person and I found it more fulfilling, but it definitely was an evolution on my part. So in Concord, just the project I want to highlight. So I talked earlier about our downtown being this historic place. And this is so we have the typical New England downtown that a lot of places in Florida, when I worked there, they wanted to recreate, but we have one. So we have the original downtown. And the picture at the top left is the downtown probably in the early 60s. And I can tell you, when I got here in 2007, it looked the same. Nothing had changed. So it was 4 lanes of traffic. That pedestrian in the middle of that picture is taking his life into his own hands as he's crossing. Narrow sidewalks, not particularly attractive, and kind of dead at night, honestly, is what was our main street. So we pulled together as a community and we decided we got to do something. So we applied for a TIGER grant through the U.S. Department of Transportation. And TIGER is an acronym, basically says, I believe, Transportation Improvements Generating Economic Redevelopment, I believe it is. And we applied in 2012. We weren't successful. We were all bummed out. But we decided, hey, let's try again. But the second time, we were actually approached by a local developer who happened to be on the Republican National Committee. And he's a bipartisan guy, so he understands both sides of the aisle. And he said, this is very important to me in my career, but it's also very important to me as my community, because he lives in the same community. He says, let me help you. So he actually had met someone who was in private consulting who had worked for the Department of Transportation and had literally had worked for the Secretary of the Department of Transportation. So he hired that consultant, and we have the first conference call with the consultant, I'll never forget. And we say, what should we do better this time around on our application? And the consultant says two things. She says, number one, the Department of Transportation does not want to make an award and then find out later that the community doesn't want this award. You know, when they have factions coming out saying, oh, we don't want federal dollars, or we don't want this, we don't need this, that they were deathly afraid of that. And number two, the then Secretary of Transportation, every morning when he came into the office, he expected a report on his desk briefing him on every single instance where his name was mentioned in social media, on the internet, and broadcast television over the last 24 hours. So every day, his staff was to give him this report, which our first reaction was, wow, that seems kind of ego-centered, but it really wasn't. It was, his name was probably mentioned in light of some other project that they were doing, so that was probably the easiest way to find out if there was an issue he needed to be aware of. So we took that idea, that council, and we made a series of YouTube videos. And we had, for example, in the bottom right, you see a snapshot of the governor of New Hampshire at the time, John Lynch. He was one of our YouTube video folks. We had a US senator, we had a mayor, we had other business leaders making these really short videos where we talked about how the entire community supported this project. And on top of that, we mentioned the Secretary of Transportation's name multiple times, over and over again, because we wanted to make sure that whatever algorithm was out there on the internet, that it was going to pick up the fact that his name was mentioned, and it would show up on his desk. So now he would see, Concord, New Hampshire, wow, they're really interested in this project. Looks like they're really on board. And so go figure, that made the difference. We were awarded the project. So we received nearly $5 million, and we parlayed that into a $14 million improvement. We completely redid our Main Street. We won several awards from it. We took out the 4 lanes, made it 2, made wide sidewalks. So now we have merchants using it for outdoor dining, events, etc. One of the things that was a learning lesson for me with this project as well was the notion of involving everybody in the community. The city council here is very much transparent and wanting to make sure that everyone has a voice. So this project, which we received funding for in 2012, we ended up having 70 public meetings for this project. That's 70, and the number is as daunting as it sounds, right? But we hired a communications firm to help us with that, and they were really great because they got the word out, they managed our meetings, and they came up with this really cool idea of having Digger the tiger, because it was a tiger grant. So they actually bought the tiger costume, and it's one of our communications professionals in the costume. And we created this whole campaign where we generated the campaign like to children, because little kids would come downtown, they would see construction, Digger would talk to them, and then they go back and tell their parents. And now their parents would be like, oh, the kids, this thing about downtown, let's go see what's going on. And then bottom left picture, Digger's actually making a presentation to the city council. So this was just, this was kind of fun, and it really made a difference. Overall, the entire project was just, we also constructed it in a way that was really reflective of what the community wanted. So we actually built this project in reverse. Typically, you build a project from the road out. We built it from the sidewalk in, because that's what the business owners wanted us to do. And it was a project that was so successful that, in fact, during active construction, we actually had an additional 15 businesses open up, which I challenge anyone out there to have that happen. Usually you end up losing a few businesses. We actually gained businesses because people could see what it was looking like, and they wanted to get on the ground floor. And our ground floor vacancy was reduced by half. And we started to get a lot more residential development, again, to take those sort of abandoned upper stories and make those viable uses now. So that brings us to today. Some of the questions were about COVID-19, so I want to address those also. So everybody in the world is dealing with COVID-19. From our perspective, we were actually kind of fortunate because when we shut down in March, we were in the middle of preparing our FY21 budget. We are a July 1st through September 30th, through June 30th fiscal year. So we were able to adapt our budget before it was adopted in light of COVID-19. So what we ended up doing is presenting council with a 0% tax rate increase, which required some maneuvering, but we're a very strong fiscal community. We were very well managed. So we were able to do that because we had what's called an unassigned fund balance, or a savings account, if you will, that we could offset some of that tax rate loss. But we're looking at the numbers. We're thinking that revenue numbers are going to come in poorly because of COVID, because businesses were shut down and people were unemployed. And I have to say that we are kind of stunned by some of the early numbers we're seeing. So for example, we collect taxes, property taxes 4 times a year here. And July 1st would have been the next big property tax collection period for us after COVID started. We were completely anticipating that the collection rates would go down compared to last year. In fact, the collection rates went up. So last year at this time, July 1, we collected a little under 95% was our collection rate for taxes on July 1st. This year, it exceeded 95%. So again, we were kind of blown away by that. And then also we thought our motor vehicle registration here in New Hampshire, motor vehicle registration is a big piece of our revenue. We assumed that people were not going to buy cars because they were unemployed or uncertain of what's going on. And in fact, we had $120,000 more revenue this year in motor vehicle registration than we had last year. So people are definitely buying cars. So it was kind of a weird thing. We are obviously still monitoring it very closely to make sure that, because we anticipate at some point there will be a blip, and we have to be prepared for that. And then finally on this issue, one of the biggest challenges we had was the notion of morale, because everybody went remote, right? Overnight, in the middle of March, we were working one day, and the next day everybody's remote. Of course, some operations couldn't happen remotely, so we had to furlough some folks. So now everybody is scattered to the wind, and they're feeling disconnected. So we wanted to make sure that people were still conscious that they were part of our family, our City of Concord family. So what the manager and I ended up doing is I would send out sort of the fact-based update as this is what's happening with COVID, this is what's happening with the departments this week. So every Friday I would do that, blast email. And the city manager, on the other hand, he ended up sending out sort of more of a fireside chat approach, which is more of a grandfatherly approach, like talking more about like your mental health, the feel good stuff, like, hey, we want you, if you need help, let us know, we'll get through this together, sort of those really positive messages. And the employees came to us later on, once we finally came back to City Hall after several months, and told us that really made a difference. They were really touched by that. And actually they want us to continue doing it because some folks are still working remote. So we're still trying to get through that. And then the last thing I want to leave with you is that there were many people that helped me throughout my career, and many organizations that helped me. And I got involved with some of these organizations, and I ended up giving back as well. And I urge all of you to avail yourselves of the benefits of your state association, the Florida County City and County Management Association, FCCMA, the Local Government Hispanic Network, of which I'm representing here today, National Federation of Black Public Administrators, and ICMA and student chapters. Take advantage, get involved, because all these organizations, we're dying to give out some help. Basically we want to help people. That's what we're here for, because we want to pass it on. We want that next generation to have the same leg up that we were given by our peers. So please get involved, and one day you'll be doing the same thing that I'm doing right now. And I want to thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any additional questions, or Professor, I'll leave it up to you as to your format here.
Awesome. In the meantime, I'm going to ask everyone to use the reactions tool to join me in a round of applause for our speaker. Thank you so much. Very informative information. And with that being said, since you mentioned ICMA, I'm just actually going to unmute France Williams, who is our current ICMA at FIU president, as well, just kind of introduce themselves. And really appreciate that you brought up the Local Government Hispanic Network. I actually have a little poll that we can launch at the end just to kind of gauge, interest and familiarity with the programs. Hi, France. There you go. Can't hear you. No. Yep. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and just launch the poll. Just wanted to kind of get a thought of, as far as for those that are interested in looking for local government, if you're interested in the Padrinos, Madrinas program, which is the mentorship program through ICMA. If you've heard of the Local Government Hispanic Network, and again, hoping that we'll Google this information. It's also in the bio that was provided. So I'm just going to leave that up for a few minutes. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to also post them in the chat.
Testing.
Yep, we can hear you now.
here I'm the president of ICMA student chapter, but that doesn't make me an AV guru. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, Carlos, and of course, Dr. Caraballo, for presenting here today. Just very quickly as my 30-second plug. Hi, fellow students. I'm the chapter president of the ICMA, International County and City Management Association chapter here on campus. Thanks, of course, to our great professors. We have a series of leadership lectures where we can connect with influential folks like Carlos. So I'm going to send my information in the chat, but I'm going to get back to letting you, the guest, take the.
Professor, I think you're muted.
So I just ended the poll results and shared them. Luckily, it looks like of the 21 that answered, 100% are interested in working in local government. So you're in the right place. Definitely good. There's some good interest in the Padrinos Madrinas program, and we'll share the link in the chat as well. And again, just as transmitted, if you're not familiar with the ICMA at FIU student chapter, definitely reach out. It's a good way to connect not only with the Miami-Dade, the Florida, but obviously the national organization as well. I really enjoyed learning more about Concord. I've been saying I wanted to make a road trip up to New England soon, so now I know I definitely have to include Concord in one of my stops.
Yes, absolutely. I would be happy to give you a tour. Any of the students, actually, if they wanted to come up and they're in the area, I would love to meet you. And hopefully it'll be past COVID by then and we can actually see things, more things.
Definitely, hopefully sooner rather than later. But it really is impressive what you've done. And what I really liked is one of the aspects that we talk about in our class is how community outreach, the media, marketing can be used to kind of bring in community buy-in. So it was interesting to see how you did that with your residents.
So if I could just address, there was one question which I have to admit, it gave me some pause. So it made me think. So I would like to talk about that one real quick if I could.
Yes, of course.
So there was one of the students said, if you could do something different on your professional journey, what would it be? So great question, thought-provoking. So I spent like all of last night pondering this, and I think, I don't know if I would say I would change it, but when I mentioned during the presentation, when you're moving from like your first job to your next big job, you may be at a different phase in your life also, where you may have family and growing kids and obligations, and your partner may have a career. So there's a lot of thinking that goes into that. And when I first moved up here, my wife, by the way, my wife is from St. Croix in the Virgin Islands, and her family lived in Florida at the time when we were in Deerfield. And so moving up here to northern New England, you can imagine, was a little bit of a culture shock. And the first winter we get here was the worst winter in over 100 years. And so we literally, and I don't, when I say literally here, I literally mean it. There was 10 feet of snow. So I've never seen so much snow in my life. And I'm from Massachusetts, but never saw that much snow. My wife was a little shell-shocked, I will be candid. So again, these are the kind of things you just got to think about how all this will progress. So she had given up her career. She had moved to this strange, place. And so that was a little bit, tough on us. Yeah, I don't want to sugarcoat it. But I will say one thing is that what turned out here in New Hampshire is that New Hampshire obviously is a smaller state than Florida. And if you have the right skill set, wherever you go, you will probably make a name for yourself if you do the right things. And here, you can, in this case, in this particular state, you can be a big fish in a smaller pond, if you will. So my wife, who gave up her career to come up here and was very concerned, is now the president of a college here in New Hampshire. Which is something that in Florida, she probably would have gotten there eventually, but it would have taken her probably much longer. And so we have these conversations every so often, her and I, where we talk about, these are the benefits. We just, but it can be tough. So you just need to make sure that everybody's on board, whatever change you make, because this career does imply movement. You're going to be going from one community to the other potentially.
That's a great point. Thank you. I know Ms. Jane Gunnarsson had asked, does your city please use body cams?
We do not use body cams. So it's an interesting question. So in Concord, we actually have, with everything that's going on right now in terms of policing, we've been looking at this more closely. So we have had a long-standing policy in our community, for example. We don't do pursuits of suspects. So we don't do high-speed pursuits ever. I think the instance would be if somebody had done something so flagrant, like they had killed somebody and they were shooting down the street, maybe we pursue them. Other than those extreme instances, we don't do that because we know it's risky. You could, hit a child, you could do all kinds of other bad things can happen. And honestly, we know that most of the people that, are committing crimes we'll probably find eventually. I mean, they're not rocket scientists a lot of times. Number two, we also have a policy of we don't take out our weapons. So firearms, the police department has a policy going back at least 3 years where they never take out their firearm unless there is an imminent threat of life to a bystander or themselves, the officer. So unlike what you might see if you watch any of those cop shows on TV, things like that, Live PD or whatever it is, you see a lot of jurisdictions where the officers are automatically pulling out their weapons when they approach a vehicle. We don't do that here. That would be a violation of policy. So while we don't have the cameras, at the same time, we have a much different type of police atmosphere than happily than we have in some other places. And I think that's also in part because of where we are in our community dynamics. We have a pretty low crime rate. So it lends itself to that sort of more of a community-oriented policing.
I'm actually going to combine perhaps two of the questions from France about the recommendations to inject more civility based on your experience coming from Deerfield and then to Concord. But also Salome mentioned, your values, and it seems like respect, it seems to be one of the values that seems to have served you really well in your career.
It is. So, I sincerely believe that, you treat everybody with respect and they'll give you respect back. And if they don't, that's fine. You just walk away because ultimately it's, personally, I don't really have time to deal with that negativity. I figure let's just walk away and have a positive interaction at some point down the road if we can. And also when you're working for a community, the same people, you're going to see them again. So if the notion that you're going to blow up and have this really negative exchange and then they're going to walk away, you're never going to have to see them again, that's never going to happen. I mean, these are the same folks that are going to show up again and again and again. So my philosophy has always been, get ahead of that, sort of know your, what's the Godfather expression? Keep your enemies closer kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a practical example. When I mentioned I came to Concord in my first 60 days, I wanted to meet as many people as I could. I made a point of meeting the people that I knew had been critical of the city and meeting the media. That's also an important piece. I left it out. When you are assigned to a community, make a point, if there's still journalists left, to meet your local newspaper reporter or whatever it might be, social media activist, whatever it is. Set up an individual meeting with that person and get to know them. If you do that early on, you will build a professional and almost like personal connection with this person. So they'll identify you more as a human versus the mouthpiece for the city government. And that will lend itself to a positive relationship. It won't get rid of all the angst, but it makes it a lot easier for you to have conversations versus, just sort of interrogations later on from the media.
Yeah, and that seems to be a common thread in a lot of things is the human touch, it goes a long way, and especially in, an industry where we're trying to care for people and make a difference. So I really appreciate it, and just wanted to invite any final thoughts as we wrap up. And again, just to thank you again for your time and just for sharing your expertise and outstanding presentation.
You're welcome, and it was my pleasure. And if anyone on the call would like to follow up with me, I think Dr. Carvalho has my contact information and has shared it with you. Feel free. You can give me a call. You can just shoot me an email, whatever you'd like. I'll be happy to help you any way I can.
Definitely. We'll be providing that. And if you go to our website, you'll be able to see the information. I'll also just share, again, the link with his bio. But just feel free to reach out. And definitely, if you're up that way and you get a chance to visit, definitely to see it play in real life and leadership. And again, thank you again so much for your time and your expertise. We're very appreciative. Thoughts from the participants?
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.